Howdy doody and welcome to the first episode of America's Dark Places, a new series where I branch out from our typical overviews of a state's weird and sometimes scary folklore and take a more focused look at the urban legends concentrated in a particular place. And where better to begin than the Smoky Mountains right here in my home state of Tennessee, and I guess a little bit in North Carolina. With this in mind, I quickly want to remind you that I'm trying to hit 100,000 subscribers in 2025, and it would help me achieve this goal if you liked this video, subscribed, and commented your favorite urban legends down below. This will never cost you a dime, and it's a quick way to say, hey YouTube, this guy's alright. Anyways, with that, join me as we explore the chilling stories that make the Smoky Mountains more than just a beautiful landscape, but a place where something darker appears to lurk too. Follow me and let's explore this dark place. If you're gonna speak about stories in the Smokies that are riddled with mystery, I don't know if there's a better place to start than the disappearance of Dennis Martin, a tale that, at first glance, seems like a typical missing persons case, but as you dive deeper, some eerie, perhaps even otherworldly things peek through the cracks. Dennis Martin was a 6-year-old resident of Knoxville, and on Father's Day weekend of 1969, he was on a camping trip with his brother, his father, and his grandpa in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This trip was, well, planned to be an uneventful camping and hiking trip really, and the trip was even a sort of family tradition that they would go through every Father's Day. On this trip, the family ventured from Cades Cove to Russell Field where they camped overnight, and then they hiked to Spencefield near the Appalachian Trail, where they were going to spend the night. At this point, it was about 4:30 p.m. on June 13th. The Martin children, Dennis and his brother, had been playing with children from another family that the Martin family had met that day, and they were apparently planning on surprising the adults, something that was fairly obvious to the adults from my impression. As such, Dennis would go hide behind a bush, planning to pop out at the right moment. My impression is that most of the children had their fun, but at this point, the adults had summoned them from their hiding spots and they'd returned back to camp. That is, except for Dennis. In Dennis's case, it had been about 5 minutes since he'd wandered behind the bush his father saw him go behind, so his father got up to look for him, and despite prompting Dennis to come out and subsequently going to look for Dennis behind the bush himself, Dennis was nowhere to be found. Dennis's father, of course, would start to panic. He would run down the nearby Appalachian Trail, assuming Dennis had gone that direction, screaming Dennis's name the whole way. And after he got nearly 2 miles down the trail, a distance that, let's admit, would have been tough for a child to cover on his own, he realized it was time to get help. After this, he would seek help from the nearby National Park Service rangers, and soon after, the largest search effort in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park would ensue. This search effort would include everyone from the National Guard to a group of Greenbriers, a group of U.S. Army Special Forces, and ultimately as many as 1,400 people would be involved in these initial efforts to find Dennis over a 56 square mile area over the first 8 days after his disappearance. Admittedly, conditions for this search were not ideal, to put it lightly. The first day after his disappearance, there were heavy rains, dropping 3 inches of rain in just a few hours. And after these rains, temperatures would drop to 50 degrees Fahrenheit, or 10 Celsius, making for a combination of wet and cold that would not have been too kind to the lost young boy. Following these rains, there was thick mist too, which would have made a difficult search effort even more trifling. Additionally, the area where they were searching was anything but easy terrain to navigate. There were steep slopes, ravines, and of course, being the Smokies, everything from poisonous snakes to bobcats to bears were native to the region, creatures that would have no trouble felling a young boy. Admittedly, there were some leads that in hindsight make you wonder if they should have been followed more thoroughly. To start, during this search, some of the Greenbriers found footsteps in the area that could have been left by a young man, but park officials thought these were likely left by Boy Scouts participating in the search. Accounts claim these footsteps led to a stream, where they disappeared, and apparently one of the tracks indicated one of the feet leaving them was barefoot, while the other was an Oxford shoe, the variety of shoe that Dennis Martin was wearing. Sadly, Dwight MacArthur, an author and retired park ranger, believes this print was likely Martin's. And as you're probably thinking, Boy Scouts are very rarely roaming the mountains barefoot. You know the old Boy Scout slogan, be prepared. Anyways, sadly, search efforts would eventually dwindle to 1,000 people by June 26th, and by June 29th, 15 days after Dennis Martin had disappeared, the search would be abandoned. That being said, this isn't totally the end of this case, as while doing research for Missing 411, David Paulides, yes, the semi-infamous David Paulides, would interview folks who were at this campground when Dennis Martin had gone missing, and would speak to one Key family. The Key family, while camping here, had apparently asked a park ranger where they could catch a glimpse of a bear in the area. Of course, the family was directed to a specific part of the campground for their best bet of seeing a bear, and according to reports that may be dubious, one of the children supposedly heard a scream, and up on the side of a nearby mountain, they saw the strange sight of what they thought was a bear, running on the side of the mountain with something slung over its shoulder. The thing is though, this bear, the thing they were describing as being large, hairy, and in the woods, was doing the distinctly unbear-like thing of holding something over its shoulder, as you might be thinking, and running and dodging between the trees, seemingly on 2 or 3 legs. Ultimately, this family would actually tell the Dennis Martin investigators about their sighting, but it wouldn't be taken seriously at the time, and would only be reported to the public when it came to the attention of David Paulides. So, what really happened to Dennis Martin that day? Was it simply a tragic case of a young boy lost in the wilderness, his footprints fading into the mist and rain, or do the strange details, the lone bear footprint, and the eerie sighting reported by the Key family suggest something more? Was Dennis taken by something lurking in the Smokies, something not quite human? Or is this just another case where the truth was simultaneously sad and mundane, just a tale of a young boy getting lost in the woods? Whatever the answer, his disappearance remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in national park history. But what do you think? Drop your theories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. Next up, while we're talking about things that might be strange, I want to give some love to another legend of the Smokies, a ghost story if you will. This one I've seen shared scarcely, but shared nonetheless on forums like Reddit, GhostSmokies.com, and even a hiker forum from the 2010s. This story is relatively simple, but it tells of a campsite in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Campsite 19. I take this to mean it's in reference to a backcountry Campsite 19, a relatively secluded campsite in a clearing in the woods essentially located at the coordinates listed on screen, that rests at about 2,800 feet in elevation. See, as the story goes, folks that camp here are liable to wake up to strange things. In particular, they're liable to awake in the middle of the night to sounds of jovial laughter, conversation, and dining. You know, forks and knives clinking around and such, and the cutting of food being performed. Sometimes, campers even report these noises are accompanied by the smell of meat, as if wild game is being cooked right outside of their tents. Sometimes they'll even hear horses stirring in the distance, perhaps horses that these individuals outside rode to the site on a multi-day trek of sorts through the rugged terrain of the Smokies. Outside, in short, it sounds like there's some sort of feast or party going on to celebrate and fully enjoy the grand adventure that this troop of individuals is partaking in. Now, these campers, of course, will generally wake up and rub their eyes, assuming some fellow hikers have arrived at their campsite and they're having a late-night meal. And judging by the noises, it must be a large group. Heck, sometimes they'll even note that the orange glow of a campfire is present, and silhouettes, too, will dance on their tents while this is ongoing. Clearly, it seems this is a normal event, a late-night soiree around a campfire after a long day of hiking. And in most of these stories, the campers' first instinct wasn't to berate these individuals that woke them from their slumber, but rather to get out of bed and say hello. The thing is, though, when they open their tents, suddenly the orange glow ceases to exist, like a flame being blown out. The sounds of the jovial party going on would leave, too, with this orange glow, and upon looking outside, the individuals that were previously in their tents will be met with silence, darkness, and only the cool mountain air. In short, if you believe this scarce local lore I was able to dig up, something is ongoing at Campsite 19 in the Smokies. But just what this something is, that's for you to decide. Let me know in the comments, what do you think it is? And have you been to Campsite 19? And have you seen something weird while you were there? I'd love to dig deeper into this local lore. And while we're at it, we might as well cover a third ghostly urban legend that you won't find written to the pages of prominent mediums, but you will find spoken on the Appalachian Trail and discussed to a brief extent on forums. Now we'll discuss the story of the Blanket Mountain Distress Call, a tale I heard by word of mouth while I spent a bit of time on the Tennessee and Georgia portions of the AT, and a tale that I'll recount to you today. To start, Blanket Mountain is one of the lesser-known peaks in the Smokies, and it lies really close to the Tennessee-North Carolina border. Its name, supposedly, is tied to one of the more prominent features of the Smokies, a feature for which the Smokies were named, its thick blanket of mist or fog that can often be seen obscuring its peak at 4,608 feet. The Blanket Mountain Manway is itself, similarly, a lesser-known trail in the Smokies that ascends Blanket Mountain, and is a relatively strenuous hike, with the term manway sort of denoting that you're in for a hike along a trail that might be considered primitive, even unofficial, and not being as well maintained as some other trails in the region. Now, as the story goes, a man and his wife were hiking up this Blanket Mountain Manway to the summit of the mountain, where they'd reconvene at the foundation of an old fire tower. Because of their differences in hiking styles, with the man dawdling and taking photos, and the woman hiking fast, they always brought walkie-talkies with them to check in on one another. They'd hiked this section of trail before a couple of times, and they never had any issues, so they weren't necessarily anxious about their outing. This all changed, though, a few hours into the hike. At this point, the woman was at the top of the peak, at the base of the old fire tower, and the man was still making his way up, taking photos and such. And that's when he heard a cry for help. Now, when he heard this cry, the man looked all around him, and he heard nothing and saw nothing. Of course, he would lift his radio and beckon his wife to see if she'd yelled for help. She hadn't, of course. He was sort of anxious at this point, and he kept his ears open, but continued to climb the mountain. When a short while later again he heard, "Help me." At this point, he knew it wasn't his wife, so he didn't ring her back, and after yelling out to the nothingness a few times, he decided to continue on his way. Then, suddenly, he heard his radio go off. It was his wife, and she asked him, "Did you just yell for help?" She had heard the voice too. He, of course, comforted her, letting her know that he hadn't said a word, and he was eventually able to make it to the top of the mountain without incident, thinking it must have been a voice he heard over his radio. When they got to the top, they would turn off their radios, since they'd rejoined and shared their strange experiences. And again, after this, they heard another cry for help. At this point, together, they'd search and yell out, asking where this hurt individual was, but it was to no avail. They would make their way off of the mountain at this point and went to the ranger station at Elkmont, reporting what they'd heard. The rangers, too, would go out and search for this individual, but they wouldn't find anyone, nor hear a single cry for help. Anyways, if you've also heard this story or experienced something similar yourself, I'd love to hear it. Maybe even share your story. You know where to tell me. So this is a short one, but I heard a legend, which I really hope was a joke when I lived in Knoxville, from my friend's family in Merville, that the black bears in the park, on account of them in some instances being far too friendly with people, see unafraid of people, are actually domesticated, and that at night they return to their various enclosures within the Smokies, where they are taken inside, fed, and allowed to rest. Then again in the morning, of course, they're released back out into the wild. In short, the park rangers quote-unquote let the bears out in the morning. Now, to be clear, they do not let the bears out. The bears are wild. They'll eat your food, and in very rare cases, every few decades, they might even eat you. And they are often so used to seeing people that they're not scared of them. That's all there is to it. Regardless, I got a good laugh from this one. Now, also near the North Carolina-Tennessee border is a trail named the Noland Creek Trail that actually starts in Bryson City, North Carolina. It's a moderately challenging hike with about 2,500 feet of elevation gain that winds its way up the ridge until it meets with a trail named the Noland Divide Trail that will take you all the way up to Clingman's Dome, an overlook that is perhaps the most famous view in the entire Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Now, you may not expect this, but this picturesque creek and hike play homage to one of the most notorious ghost stories in all of the Smokies. As a bit of background, the area around Noland Creek wasn't always pristine wilderness. In the past, for example, it was settled by pioneers, and because of this, you'll find their eerie remnants, disheveled homesteads, cemeteries that have been worn to the point that their letters are illegible, and even old instruments, tools, kilns, and even the remnants of fire circles left behind by these people of old. As the story goes, near this creek way back in the day lived one of these pioneers, a young woman, a farm girl, and she got lost in the forest surrounding her farm while out playing. While lost, she would call out to her father for help, but would still continue to commit the cardinal sin of being lost in the woods, continuing to wander, hoping she would find her way home. She wouldn't make it home by sunset, and would find herself lost in the forest at night. Now there's also another side of this story. The father actually quickly noticed the absence of his daughter, and even heard some of her cries, so he went out searching for her. Hearing her cries in every direction as he wandered the forest, lantern in hand, searching for his daughter, trying to locate where his beloved daughter's cries were coming from. Sadly, this tale doesn't end happily. It's said that after some time, other locals would notice that the father went missing, and they'd eventually track down his body, and the lantern lying next to it, putting the pieces together. The daughter, on the other hand, was never found. Because of this, it's said that if you are to hike Noland Creek Trail at night, you're liable to not only see the glow of an old oil lantern shining and swinging in the distance, but you might even hear the sounds of this father-daughter duo crying out to one another in an eternal dance, trying to find each other in the dark mountain night. The Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail is a one-way loop road in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, sort of near the wild and wonderful Gatlinburg, Tennessee. This road was first designated in the 1930s, and it's scenic to say the least, running through beautiful forests beside rushing streams and taking you past the homesteads of pioneers like that of the Ogle family that farmed and hunted, living off of the land in left-behind architecture that'll give you a taste for the life of Appalachian settlers of the 1800s and early 1900s. This road winds for 5.5 miles of breathtaking scenery, and it's honestly one of my favorite roads in America. If you visit the Smokies, you should give it a drive. That being said, if you choose to embark on a drive through these parts at night, you might be in for more than you bargained for. As the story goes, back in the early 1900s, there was a family in the area that lies just off of this road, perhaps even one of the famous Ogle family, and their family cabin burnt down. And in the process, while most of the family was able to escape the flames, a young member of the family named Lucy was unable to get out in time and would perish. Lucy, however, was not ready to leave this world. It's said that shortly after her passing, a man named Foster would be riding through the Smokies on horseback, sort of along the area that is now designated as the Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail, and he would see a young woman who he remarked was astonishingly beautiful standing on the side of the road, barefoot on a cold winter night. Of course, being a gentleman, Foster would offer her a ride home on his horse, and she would of course accept. He would take her to a nearby cabin where she would dismount and thank him, making her way to the door. Now after this, Foster was smitten, and for about a week after he dropped her off, he could think of nothing other than Lucy. As such, he knew it was time to make his move. He would ride back to Lucy's home, knocking on the door of the cabin where he dropped her off, and upon seeing her parents, he would be invited inside where he would sit at their table and ask them if he could have Lucy's hand in marriage. Their faces, though, upon being asked this question, would demonstrate some combination of shock and astonishment. Lucy, you see, couldn't have been the woman he met on the side of the road, because she died well before that time when their cabin burnt down. Now, of course, being horseback isn't the only scenario that'll make you liable to see old Lucy. Rather, they say even in modern day, if you drive along the Roaring Fork Motor Nature Trail at night, you might catch a glimpse of a beautiful young woman walking barefoot on the side of the road. And if you stop, well, she won't turn down your offer of a ride home. But her directions will take you somewhere unusual, one of the disheveled log cabin homesteads that dot the side of this scenic roadway. Deep within the misty and haunting landscape of the Smoky Mountains, there's more than just the chill of the wind and the sounds of rustling leaves. The region is steeped in mystery and folklore and is home to creatures and legends that have lingered for centuries. Now, we've discussed some of these so far, but one such legend that continues to send shivers down the spines of those who hear it is the tale of Spearfinger, a terrifying entity from Cherokee mythology. Spearfinger is known by several names, including Stone Dress, which describes her impervious side, Spearfinger is said to wander the forests of eastern Tennessee and western North Carolina, and her name reflects both her terrifying abilities and her fearsome nature. Now, Spearfinger is no ordinary person, of course, if you can't tell already. They have a finger that's said to be as sharp as obsidian, and this finger is said to be able to pierce through anything in its path. This finger, as it's called, is so powerful that it can easily pierce armor and stone alike. One of her other names, Stone Dress, is just as telling, reflecting her strength and the near impenetrability of her skin. This unyielding hide could even deflect the sharpest arrows fired at her by native hunters who crossed her path. Despite her terrifying abilities, though, Spearfinger is not invincible. She holds her heart, literally, in the palm of her right hand, and if struck, she would fall. However, she keeps her hand tightly balled into a fist, guarding the one vulnerable spot in her otherwise indestructible form. As Spearfinger roams the wilderness, her footsteps are anything but quiet. Unlike humans, whose feet fall softly on the ground, her footsteps are loud and unnerving, sounding like stones dropping or clattering across the forest floor. This cacophony of noises has made her presence known to many who dare venture into the Smokies, and it's said that sometimes, if you listen closely, you might even hear her singing softly to her companion, a raven who flies beside her. The haunting melody has earned her the title of Siren of the Smokies in some circles, warning those who hear it that danger is near. But despite the fact that Spearfinger is not only difficult to pierce, but also has a finger that can pierce anything, her most terrifying ability is her shape-shifting. It's said that she can actually take on the appearance of anyone, often assuming the form of someone close to her intended victim, such as a beloved family member. This terrifying power allows her to lure the vulnerable into her clutches. However, there's a catch. Spearfinger cannot change shape if you're looking directly at her, and if you keep your eyes locked on her, she can't wield her obsidian-like finger, nor can she use her stone skin to shield herself, in some cases at least. For this reason, she often favors the appearance of an old woman, someone who can blend into the environment and draw others in without suspicion. Spearfinger's insidious ways were not lost on the Cherokee people either. It's said that she would often be drawn to the smoke of campfires, given people would be near them, often young ones, her favorite snacks. And in the guise of an elderly woman, she would approach these children and offer to comb their hair, an innocent enough gesture that would lure them into a false sense of security. And once they'd fallen asleep, Spearfinger would strike, making them her prey. The Cherokee, because of this, were wary of traveling alone, as they feared the shape-shifting hag might be nearby, hiding in plain sight. There were even tales of Spearfinger returning to villages disguised as someone who had previously been her victim, only to deceive their loved ones once again. Of course, the Cherokee people wouldn't just stand for this. Ever resourceful, they devised a plan to rid themselves of Spearfinger's terror. Led by a wise medicine man, they dug a deep pit, covering it with brush, and used a campfire to create thick smoke to lure the creature in. When she appeared in the form of an old woman, the medicine man saw through her disguise and threw a spear at her, but the spear, of course, shattered against her stony hide. Warriors would then fire arrows, but they too splintered off harmlessly. Spearfinger, now enraged, charged towards the people, but her pursuit ended when she fell into the cleverly concealed pit. Although she was trapped, she was far from defeated. The Cherokee had underestimated her resilience. It was then, though, that celestial beings, moved by the plight of the Cherokee people, would intervene. One appeared as a bird, singing "Heart, Heart, Heart" to draw the attention to the one place she was vulnerable, the heart she held tightly in her hand. But the people misinterpreted this song and shot arrows at her chest, which were ineffective. A second celestial being, disguised as a chickadee, would land on her hand where her heart was concealed, bringing the attention to her wrist. A warrior, finally understanding the celestial message, severed her wrist with an arrow, exposing her heart. And with the heart exposed, another warrior pierced it, finally ending Spearfinger's reign of terror. The defeat of Spearfinger became a legend passed down through the generations, a tale of bravery, wisdom, and the intervention of celestial beings. Today, the Cherokee people still speak of her, pointing to the remnants of stone bridges she supposedly built and reminding others of the dangers that lurk in the shadows of the Smoky Mountains. All of this being said, though, there are still whispers of individuals who venture into the woods and encounter an old woman who, sometimes, if they're young enough, offers to comb their hair. The eerie legend persists, a reminder that sometimes not all is as it seems in the deep woods, and there are dangers hidden beneath the surface of even the most innocent encounters. Now, if you're familiar with the Smokies, you'll know that their namesake, the Smokies, is because they're so darn foggy. Now, if you're to believe scientists and reasonable individuals, they'll tell you that this fog comes from the rich vegetation on the mountain, and the fact that plants sort of exhale volatile organic compounds with the oxygen which rises into the air and condenses into fog under the right conditions. These same molecules are also responsible for the rich blue color that you see in the sky above the Smoky Mountains. Now, with all of this in mind, a small subset of individuals deny the claim that this logical, natural process results in the smoky sky you see in the mountains, and rather claim that in modern day it's actually strategically placed smoke machines responsible for the majority of the fog above the Smokies. There's really nothing to say here except for the fact that they're wrong, and heck, we might as well do a little math to prove it. So, given the Great Smoky Mountains National Park is about 815 square miles, or 2,110 kilometers squared, and fog typically has a liquid water content of about 0.05 to 0.5 grams per meter squared, let's assume the average thickness of the fog layer, or its height, is an underestimated 10 meters, and that 1/4 of the park is covered in fog at any given time, which is also an underestimate. That would mean that the total fog volume on a very lightly foggy day is about 5.27 cubic kilometers. Now, assuming that a 1,000 watt fog machine can produce about 8,520 meters cube of fog per hour, a pretty typical rate for these machines, that would mean that it would take about 62,000 of these machines running for an hour to accomplish this single day of low fog cover. If you were to assume that these ran all day, you'd use about 7.5% of Nashville's daily power demand. So in short, there's no way this is happening, but I appreciate the joke. So there is a spot in Gatlinburg known as the Greenbrier restaurant that has a bit of a reputation. See, it wasn't always an upscale restaurant. Back in the 1930s, it was a lodge, a place where transients would stay for a while, and one of these transients was a woman named Lydia. In short, if you believe the stories, here at the Greenbrier, there's a really weird tale that the ghost of a young lady named Lydia dwells in the restaurant. The thing is, though, the ghost isn't the weird part. Rather, it's the fact that this girl, Lydia, met her end after being left at the altar by her husband because, get this, the Wampus Cat got her. Yes, the six-legged tractor trailer of a cougar that supposedly roams the mountains of Appalachia and stalks its prey with glowing eyes that we discussed in our last Tennessee video. That's pretty metal. Also, sadly, Lydia never knew that her soon-to-be husband was mauled by some mythical beast. Rather, she thought that he just ditched her at the altar. Anyways, Lydia was more than disappointed with this result and ended up in the same building that houses the Greenbrier, taking her own life. As the legend goes, the credence to this tale is that if you're looking at the middle beam above the bar, you can supposedly still see rope burns from this event. Because of this, it's said that people occasionally still spot poor Lydia on the building staircase, crying, and mediums who have stopped by the restaurant report time and time again that while she's a good spirit, she's certainly still dwelling on the premises. Also, while the Lydia story is the primary haunted story on the campus of the Greenbrier restaurant, it's not the only one. As the story goes, a young boy apparently passed away in what was a pool on the property back in the day, in one of Gatlinburg's first pools, actually. If you buy the stories, this young boy's spirit enjoys spending time under the building's staircase, and as a show of respect, the staff placed a set of jacks under the staircase for him to play with. Apparently, this ghost is most likely to create activity when it's loud, citing that raucous guests are known to have their glasses pushed off of the bar from time to time. Anyways, in modern day, the Greenbrier restaurant remains a place for upscale dining, spirits, and spirits. Hope you like the corny joke. The campus is incredibly beautiful and well kept, and I suppose if you're looking for an upscale yet simultaneously spooky experience in the Smokies, this might be your place. Nestled deep in the Smoky Mountains is a mysterious place, a place that only shows itself to those it chooses, and a place which is synonymous with some variety of nirvana and one with nature, while simultaneously, in legend, feeling almost sentient. This place is called Lake Atagahi. As the legends go, this lake, nestled and kept secret deep in the Smoky Mountains, is a place that's made visible to those that are spiritually disciplined and engaged in prayer, fasting, and an all-night vigil. After these tasks, if you are truly full of good intent, you may hear the sounds of 1,000 birds flapping, which will lead you to a body of water that's violet in color and fed by natural springs. The Cherokee legend of this beautiful, almost fountain of youth-like place begins with a Cherokee brave who visited the lake, and only wished to observe its beauty, making note to visit it again only because of the grandeur inside of it. A few months later, in the winter, he would do just that, but only after being forced to do so by a harsh winter which drove him to nearly starve. Of course, when he arrived at the lake, there was a black bear there, drinking from it, and in his famished state, he did not consider his actions, and shot at the black bear, piercing it with an arrow. The bear would fall into the lake, and shortly after, it would emerge, healed, and in human tongue, it would declare that the brave had betrayed them. The brave, of course, would not survive this encounter, and I don't know what happened to him, but his body would be found a few days later. It's said that since then, no human has ever found Lake Atagahi. Additionally, while this place is deeply concealed, there is one legend about how you may find it. It's said that if you're atop Klingman's Dome, right at sunrise, you can see morning mist rising from the waters of the lake. So to summarize, this one isn't scary, but there's a hidden lake with fountain of youth-like properties deep within the Smokies, if you buy the Cherokee legends, that is. But this lake has chosen not to show itself to humans anymore, rather remaining hidden. That being said, maybe if you are worthy, you will be able to find this incredible place yourself. Maybe. The legend of the Cussing cover takes place in Cades Cove, perhaps one of the best known and most storied portions of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and a place that people have called home for well over 100 years, and that was frequented by the Cherokee for a very long time before that. Europeans began to settle here in the early 1800s, building homes, barns, and clearing land for farming. Ultimately, this area would fall within that purchased to make way for the Smoky Mountains National Park, ejecting most of these families, with some opting to stay for the remainder of their lives. This history, of course, paints a picture that demonstrates that there are many sources from which people of olden days could remain in our world as ghosts, and perhaps the most well-known ghost story of Cades Cove is one referred to as the legend of the Cussing cover. See, one of the early families of Cades Cove was the Esteps family, and this family was comprised of Mavis and her husband Basil, who lived in a cabin along Whistling Branch Stream. They lived a quiet, if not kind of boring life here, but one thing that was a prevalent theme in their lives was that Mavis was terrified of the idea of getting struck by lightning. This fear stemmed from a then urban legend that those born during thunderstorms were destined to be taken out of this world by one as well. Mavis, of course, was born during a thunderstorm, and therefore wouldn't even go outside during the rain, sleep on metal furniture, or quilt with metal needles during storms. Now, another detail to this story that's important is Mavis was an avid quilter, and one of her mini quilts she made was a patchwork quilt made of flannel shirts that belonged to her husband, Basil, and she would call this quilt the Cussing cover, because Basil wore one of these shirts during the couple's first marriage argument, and it used quite a bit of off-color language if you catch my drift. Regardless, Mavis would not be struck by lightning, but she would instead pass from some disease, and at the end of her life, she would give Basil permission to remarry with two conditions. Don't sell any of her quilts, and certainly don't place her quilts on a metal bed. Basil, of course, agreed to these requests, thinking little of them. But the thing is, when Basil did remarry to a woman named Truly Jane, who was much younger than him, she'd insist that their wooden bed wasn't cutting the mustard for her, and insisted he get a metal one instead. As the story goes, one night it was rather cold, and Truly Jane would ask Basil to get one of the quilts out of the closet to insulate them better. Basil, of course, thoughtlessly would grab the famous Cussing cover and throw it on the bed. Truly Jane would wake up shortly after this and see at the end of the bed an angry-looking woman standing and staring at the couple, who started to scream and only disappeared when Basil woke up. Basil insisted this was just a night terror, and they went back to sleep. But just a few hours later, Truly would awake again to a flash of light, after which the room would fill with smoke. When the smoke cleared, of course, she would find Basil lying on the floor, burnt to a crisp next to the metal bed. It appeared that despite the lack of a thunderstorm, he'd been struck by lightning. After this, Mavis's quilts were given to the daughters of the family, and over time they were distributed throughout the community. Legend has it that in the vicinity of the Smoky Mountains, if you find yourself eyeing a red quilt, take heed and be sure to ask where this quilt was made, as it may very well be the Cussing cover itself, and upon bringing it home, you're liable to meet a similar fate to that of Basil if you lay it across a metal frame bed. White Oak Flat Cemetery rests in Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and its heritage dates back to the early 1800s and Gatlinburg's foundings. See, originally, the area that is today Gatlinburg was named White Oak Flats for the many white oak trees in the area, and the land that the cemetery rests on is land that those original homesteads of the first settlers rested on. Of course, where there are people, there are burials, and having a centralized location to bury the dead quickly became a priority. Thus, this cemetery was established, and in this cemetery you can find the graves of many of Gatlinburg's founders, including those of the Ogle and Maple families, folks that were crucial to the formation of the community. Of course, where stories are this rich, there are always rumors that history lives on into the present in more than a symbolic way. See, locals and visitors claim that this cemetery, strangely, is more active at night than during the day, or at least you're liable to see more humans in it. The most commonly reported sighting is that of full-bodied apparitions, standing between the tombstones of the White Oak Flat Cemetery, and EVPs are also an extremely common occurrence within it. In particular, on windy nights, it's said that as the wind eerily whips its way through your hair, sometimes it'll sound oddly familiar, almost like it's whispering your name. Now, I should be clear. There are few, if any, named hauntings associated with this place, but it's largely considered to be haunted in a general sense, so if you're eager to catch something strange without leaving the bounds of Gatlinburg, this place might just be your ticket. Deep in the heart of the Smoky Mountains lies a legend of untold riches, a secret so well hidden by the mountains themselves that no modern soul has ever laid eyes upon it, a place whispered about in old Appalachian tales where fortune and misfortune walk hand in hand. This is the story of the lost Smoky Mountain gold mine. As the legend goes, the mine, rich beyond imagination, was first discovered by a group of early settlers in the 1800s, or as some stories tell it, a reclusive prospector who stumbled upon a vein of pure gold deep within the mountains. The story says he worked in secret, harvesting enough to make him a wealthy man. By night, he would go to and from his homestead to mine the gold, and by day, he would bury this gold on his property, ensuring that his actions go mostly unnoticed, fearing that others might follow him and stake a claim on this gold themselves. Of course, you can only stave off greed for so long, and before long, legend has it that he was either killed by bandits desperate for his secret, or that the Cherokee people, privy to the knowledge of the mine's location, would seal the mine tunnel, closing it and hiding it for eternity. Some even say the mine collapsed from natural processes, never to be found again. Now, regardless of what you believe, rumor has it that after this man passed away, people that later lived on his land found buried gold coins and some golden nuggets that were rather small on the property, indicating that whatever he was sneaking off to do at night may have been thrusting him towards riches. So that's the legend. As for who this man is, there's speculation that in life he may have been one Perry M. Schultz, a man born in Sevier County in 1822 who lived north of the Greenbrier area. While he was listed on the 1860 and 1870 census as a farmer, there's something curious about him. By multiple historical accounts, for some reason this farmer obtained a charter from the state of Tennessee to mine an area of Greenbrier near the head of the Porter's Creek. That being said, the list of minerals on this charter did not include gold. Regardless, his great-grandfather would claim that Schultz was often seen by her parents coming out of the Smokies with gold and silver in tow, and these rumors combine with other rumors that say Schultz was no farmer but rather a blacksmith, and that he would melt this gold on his property and make it into his own gold coins. They say this is the case at least until the feds caught wind of what he was doing and would run him out of town. Folks, of course, would hear these tales and think it was all a bunch of hullabaloo. That is until 1967 when a man named Walt Rice, who lived on the land of the Schultz homestead, would find a clay pot buried on the property. And if you believe the legend, inside of it was $37,000 in golden coins. Now, as for whether this is real, let's go through the facts. Many news outlets report that Walt Rice was real, and in 1967 he would actually find this clay pot in his garden filled with gold and silver coins worth tens of thousands of dollars. This is the crux of the "this is real" argument in this whole thing. The proof? The smoking gun, if you will. And sure, I could stop and take the word of the 100 tabloid sources on this gold and accept that there's some fact to this legend. But the thing is, from what I can tell, no high-profile journals ever covered this story. No local newspapers interviewed any Walt Rice, and no photos of Walt or his gold exist. I'm not saying I think it's 100% fake, but this has made me really skeptical. Because this sort of thing, golden coins of a bygone era being found, usually grabs media headlines. Beyond this, who's to say that even if this was real, that these gold coins weren't just a cache of common gold and silver coins found by Walt Rice or even Schultz back in the day? Why does it have to be this grand tale where Schultz found a lost gold mine and fooled the feds when finding an existing trove of gold produced by the government would be far more likely and far more common? In short, while I hate bursting an urban legends bubble, I'm skeptical on this one. But you Eastern Tennessee locals know where to tell me if you've got more information on this case. Man, what a breath of fresh air it's been to cover a place near and dear to my heart like the Smokies. Thank y'all for coming on this journey with me through my personal favorite mountain range in the USA. Now, if you enjoyed this first video in my Dark Places series, go ahead and let me know by commenting, liking the video, and subscribing. If this video does well, I'll be sure to make more. Otherwise, whether you just got a new quilt as a gift and it looks like it may be made out of red flannel, or if you came across an old woman in the woods as you made your way up Mount LeConte, don't you ever forget, it's always story time.